Okay. Evening, everybody. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 25 tonight, if you want to open your Bibles there. We're on lesson 309, so if you need to pick up the questions, they're back in the back on the tray. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer, and we'll get started with the reading. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the wonderful day that you've provided to us. We thank you for the opportunity we have this evening to study your word. Please bless us in this pursuit of striving to know you better, to grow in love for you and for one another. Please be with all the classes this evening, Father, and we pray that we will continue to grow here as a group that meets at Brownsburg. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 25. Just for the context recap here, we've still been talking about David and Saul, obviously. We just looked at Saul and David's interaction in Gedi last class period, and we talked about how David spares Saul's life, and we see how David does not reach out his hand against Saul because of Saul's position as the Lord's anointed, and the reverence that God holds in David's heart, and even these positions of men that David has already been told by God he is going to, eventually take over for one day. David does not take it under his own authority or own initiative to decide when that time is going to be. And so that's kind of what we saw last week in chapter 24. And so in chapter 25, we're going to kind of pick up from there, and hopefully some themes pop out to you as we're reading, but we'll get into the discussion after we read chapter 25. So starting in verse 1. It said, "Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, 'Go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David.' When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who have come from where I do not know where?' So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, 'Every man strap on his sword.' And every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. And we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him.' Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, Go on before me. Behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey, and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears, and hear the words of your servant. Let not my lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt, and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. For the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And whenever the Lord has done to my lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my lord, then remember your servant." And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who have restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Galim. That's chapter 5. So, I don't want to jump over the very first part of chapter 25 in sake of the rest of the story here, but it's very important when it has such a quick section here about Samuel's death. And we see how he's had this huge impact over the last several chapters and, this time period in Israel. And we've talked about, from the time he was a young boy and he was raised up with Eli in the temple, and we saw him become a prophet. We saw him become this great extension of God's hand to the people, and how everything he said came to pass in Israel, and not one of his words that came out of his mouth ever fell without taking place. And that was God being with him. And Samuel became this great leader for the people of Israel. And, we talked a little bit about how, when Israel demands this king, part of it is them, not being happy with the situation of Samuel kind of being the, in a lot of ways, the kind of governor of the people at that time, the judge. System was no longer working out for them. And, he relays that information, that great information about how truly they've rejected God as their king. But the reason I brought all that up is when you look at the instability of things right now and where Saul is as a king, what the things he's done, the things that he's continued to do in his kind of emotional state, it's very significant when you think about Samuel, who has throughout all of this been a very key, spiritual figure for the people, who has been a very foundational piece to their leadership, for guidance, and now that's gone away. Now Samuel's passed away, and really you're in this time of quite a lot of upheaval when you think about where Saul is, the things that he's been doing, the way that he's kind of been neglecting his responsibilities as king, and David, who we know he's going to become king, but he's not really in any position to where he's ruling over the people, right? I mean, he's constantly on the run. He's hiding in caves. And so, you think about, this is just setting the stage for how difficult of a time period this would probably have been for the people of Israel. And so I think, just to jump over that, because it happens very quickly there at the start of chapter 5, doesn't pay the importance of that phrase justice of, Samuel's passed away, and this is a huge deal to everyone in this nation who has, really relied on Samuel for, a long time at this point. John, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to bring to our attention that in Clark's commentary, he dates things, and you can look up the dates and look at Samuel. He's roughly about 100 years old. So he's been around a long time. He's been a good factor, as you say, to Israel.
Yeah, and
He went home, but he was still in the background, helping them in many ways, even though he was gone.
yeah, I think there's a difficulty for us when we're reading this to think, there's no way for us to experience everything that Israel was going through at this time just by reading 1 Samuel. That does such a disservice to just all the complicated things that happen in everyday life, to be like, well, I guess nothing was happening in Israel except Saul chasing after David. That's not what was happening, right? There's other things going on. And, we really don't spend a lot of time with Samuel, but I think those quick passages that really talk about his importance to the people and how he was, in a lot of ways, similar to how David quickly rises up to be this figure that everybody really gravitates to. That's also what Samuel was, and that's what it mentions as he kind of becomes this prominent figure, that the people really looked up to him, and now that figure's gone. And that's something that's never attributed, not that it's a lot of times discussed about the kings, it's never really attributed to something where, Saul's done, where people rally to Saul and people love Saul, really. We don't see a lot of that happening. And so now you have this vacuum of, hey, we don't have this great influencer that's been here for a number of years. Jordan.
Another thing to think about Samuel's death here is what's coming up in the next few chapters. We're going to see the end of Saul's reign. The people won't have Saul to go to anymore. They won't have Samuel to go to. So it's setting up quite beautifully for David to be in that position to receive the kingdom after Saul's death against Philistines.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all eventually going to lead to that. But even when Saul dies, we're going to see that there's some difficulty initially, right, with David getting. But yeah, this is all leading to, God is going to give, the keys over to David to be this leader in the nation. And then obviously we know who David's leadership all, reverts back to God. But very important part here at the start of chapter 5. I just didn't want to jump over that for the sake of, the main part of the story, because that is very significant. All right. So we jump now, kind of verse 2 throughout the rest of the chapter. David, still on the run, still in Judah, southern part of Israel. He is now, not to be confused with Mount Carmel, but this area of Carmel would have been somewhere between, I believe it's like between, Ziph and Ma'an and this area in southern Israel. And so this town, city, whatever you want to call it, southern part of Israel where David's kind of interacting here. So who are we introduced to in chapter 25? Nabal. All right, what do we know about Nabal? Because before we get into all the stuff that happens, just the first introduction to him, what's the very first thing we know about him? Very first thing we learn is he is exceedingly wealthy, right? And as was common, they talk about, the livestock to show his wealth. 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Just as a quick aside to let you know, okay, give you a ballpark idea of how exceedingly wealthy. Like, that's a lot of animals. And I don't think that necessarily encompasses all of his wealth just right there. But just a quick aside to be like, hey, this is how much possessions he has. Okay, what else do we, so that's the first thing we learn about. What else do we learn about him, or what's the next characteristic or connection that's brought up? Megan? Okay, so a couple of things in there Megan mentioned. He's a very harsh and badly behaved man, and also he has a beautiful and discerning wife. What, just for the sake of dumbing it down for myself, and what does discerning mean? What do you think they mean by that? Intelligent, okay, right? Someone who, thoughtful, inquisitive, seeks out information, is able to find information, is able to make decisions, is kind of how I take it. Someone who's a discerning personality. So that's her introduction compared to him. So she is smart, beautiful. He is harsh and badly behaved. And just because John's already brought it up, and I'm sure somebody else was, what else do we know about him? Where does Nabal come from? Verse 3. Yeah, he's a Calebite. I guess there's one problem in every family. So, anyway, yeah, so he's from the tribe of Caleb. If you remember, Caleb being one of the spies, after they take possession of the land, him and Joshua are the only two that survived from that generation. Caleb and his descendants possess the area around Hebron. All right, so that's going to be kind of the area that they inhabit. And so now we're introduced to Nabal here, who is a descendant from that group. And so,
Caleb and Joshua, Caleb was a pretty nice guy.
yeah, I think so. I think so.
He was one of those guys that he really believed the Lord. He followed through with the spies there, and he lived through the 40 years of wandering. And him and Caleb are the only ones entered into the promised land. So that Caleb is, he's a good guy.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've already talked enough about, with Eli, with David. We're going to see plenty. I mean, Samuel. There's only so much you can do. Sometimes these kids just get out of line and, become problems here. So, and you got to forgive Caleb a little bit. I mean, he's been dead for a little bit. You can only have such a great amount of influence, right? But in all seriousness, the main thing we're supposed to learn right off the bat, Nabal is not a good person, right? I can't think of anyone who is so directly kind of described this way right off the bat, which it's weird that it doesn't say like exceedingly wicked or anything like that, or we're going to see like with the kings where it talks about, they, did not follow in the ways of their father David, like that kind of description. Here, their description is harsh and badly behaved, right? But he's a wealthy man. And I think it is specific to contrast that with how Abigail is, like discerning and beautiful versus badly behaved and harsh. So, not sure how that all works out on a daily basis between the two of them, but I'm sure Abigail has it quite difficult in her life. So, Nabal's introduced. How does David come into play here and his group? Why are we introduced to Nabal? What does this have to do with David and his journey here?
Well, they were sharing the sheep. He was taking care of his men.
Okay, very good. So they're shearing the sheep. This is kind of a special time where they're, a celebration time, a time of feasts and things like that. But David and his men are out protecting, the men who are out shepherding the flock, who are watching over the livestock. And David asks them to go and petition something from Nabal. What do they ask for, or what does David ask for from Nabal? Yeah, contribution. Hey, we've been out here and we'd like some food. In his petition, what does he use to try and support, like, hey, you can, like, it's okay if you give us some food? Like, what is his kind of reasoning to be like, hey, we're not, we're worth giving food, I guess. I'm not saying that right, but I kind of want you guys to, what does David say in his petition to try and appeal to Nabal? Yeah, I've done you no harm. And even, let me think. I've done you no harm, and I've had every opportunity to do so. Correct? I've had every opportunity to do you harm. Yes, sir.
Well, protected. While your men were in our presence, we were protected of them. They were safe in our presence. We would not have allowed any harm to come to them. And so that's worth something.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, going the whole, like, hey, we're good guys. We've been out here with your shepherds, with your shearers. We've protected them, like going through the lane, and kind of along. Hey, we could have done bad, but we didn't. We protected them. Nothing was unaccounted for when they were with us, right? There was no situation of like, hey, the books are off a little bit, like something's not adding up, like maybe they stole, like everything was totally, in perfect lockstep of how it should have been. No problems whatsoever, right? So he's trying to give him a little bit of information of who he is, right? Like this is a way of saying, hey, David, this is my group. This is what we've been doing. And hopefully through this brief introduction in this petition, you see kind of who I am as a man, what kind of man I am, and tries to appeal to Nabal that way. Now, that's David's introductory statement to appeal to Nabal. How does Nabal respond to that? Beyond just saying no. Yeah, who's David, right? First off, like, you're nothing. You're nothing important. Like, who are you? Who is this son of Jesse? What else does he say? Yeah, why should I get you anything? Why should I support you? Okay, Dad?
He says, there's a lot of troublemakers like you that are leaving their masters. So he either assumes or, assumes the words or out lies about the situation with Saul and David. And so he accuses him wrongly.
Okay, very good. So we've kind of hit on all the things. One is like, who are you, David? You're nobody that I, should concern myself with you. These are my things. I've gotten them for my servants. Like, I've gone and done this for my shearers. Now you want me to give them to you? Like, who are you that I should do that? And then also, as Dad mentioned, the fact that there's been a lot of talk about servants leaving their masters. And then obviously he's kind of inferring, so you're one of those guys who's left their master and now you're relying on me to provide for you because you abandoned your responsibilities. Because you had not been loyal, you had not been honorable, you had not served your, whatever your master was. And now you're in need of my, salvation here. And so, right, it's a snap judgment. I think everything in that statement, would we all agree, fits the description of harsh and badly behaved that we were talking, because this interaction here is meant to be a respectful, communication, right? David is extremely respectful, right, in his petition, right? Let's just read a couple of things up there real quick. So he sends these men here, and, I could see, if we just looked at Nabal from a 10,000-foot view and, we didn't, necessarily have all this information before us. This group of men maybe is coming up. Maybe he sees them. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's heard about David's group being in this area. Maybe he hasn't. But David sends men up, 10 young men, and he says, peace be to you, peace be to your house, peace be to all that you have. That statement right off the bat is him saying, I'm not taking anything from you, right? Like by that statement, it's, peace be to you, peace be to your house, peace be to everything. Like this is not me coming and taking anything. I am submitting to you in a sense. I am, humbly coming before you asking for these things, right? Because someone who is about to take over someone's property and steal their things, they don't come up and introduce themselves. They take what they want by force. That's not what David does. That's how he approaches Nabal. Nabal, on the other hand, immediately judges David, judges the group. Hey, you're in this situation because you're one of the people that has fled. And, beyond just, even looking at the fact of, did Nabal have to provide for all these people? Like, was he wrong to say, hey, I'm not going to? I don't think he would have been necessarily wrong to have to provide for all these men. I'm not saying he couldn't have or whatever not. I don't think the sin that Nabal acts in is, hey, I can't give you all this food. I think the sin is how he treats David so unkindly and so disrespectfully. And then, which is very fitting of his character. But, I don't see anywhere where it's like Nabal was totally required to give all this food to David, because that would have been a significant amount. But, certainly the way he handles it shows his heart and shows his kind of wicked nature. But kind of before we get more into that, Heather, did you have a comment?
When I was just thinking about this, I mean, this is assume, at least I have, that Nabal knew about David and knew he was out there. And it's possible he was just completely unaware, because apparently he can't, pay attention to what's going on in his own land. Maybe he isn't aware who David is and what he was doing, but that's a problem. If you've got your flocks and your sheep and they're shearing, and you don't know that there's 600 men hanging out around, that's a problem. And I think this is also from later in the story, we can really see that Abigail's the one who's really keeping them in mind.
Yeah, we'll definitely see at the end of the story, yeah, he doesn't really know what's going on in a lot of situations. But, yeah, that's a good point. Jordan?
The idea of him being in his rights to not provide for them, there might be an argument for that, but I think it also kind of breaks the spirit of everything that God was trying to teach them when he was taking them to the wilderness and everything. It's all about hospitality that you show towards others, towards strangers, sojourners in the land. How much more towards your fellow people. If you got a person coming in, you should be hospitable to them, not how Nabal was to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think the fact that he's rich and all that stuff adds to that. I think the main thing I was looking at with that was more of I don't think the problem is as soon as he says I can't provide all this to you. I think, yeah, I agree with you in the spirit of, the commands God had given them and, the things they were meant to remember in the spirit of these commands of treating the sojourner and the traveler. Yeah, certainly any support he could have given would have been appreciated by David. He was unwilling to support in any way, and in fact went the other way as to justify why he wouldn't do it, right? So, yeah, I think he should have, probably based on his means. I just think the bigger insult to David is he took it to a level of disrespect and judged David on something that I think we've already seen David prides himself on, is his service and his commitment to those he is committed to serve. Even Saul, throughout all this, tumultuous, situation, he has still remained faithful to a pretty great extent to Saul. John, Dad, and then Gary, I think you.
I've been sitting here thinking, why didn't Nabal talk with his servants and find out some information about how David had taken care of him? They could have really talked about things and given him an idea of why David was even saying something to him.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens later on with Abigail's response and how she doesn't go to Nabal pretty much informs you of this is probably something they've tried before. I'm sure it wasn't like Abigail's never gone to Nabal in any situation and tried to calm him down or try and change his mind. Same thing with his servants. I'm sure it was a matter of if we want to get this done, we can't involve him. He is TNT. He is, gas to whatever fire that we're trying to put out, for sure. Dad?
Just to make a comment that Deuteronomy 14:26 and Deuteronomy 28, that there are provisions, even in Nehemiah, that talk about when you've been given this produce, when you have this, there needs to be provisions made for the Levites, there needs to be provisions made for sojourners and others so that they can eat and be filled. So probably he even was violating the law, but I do agree with you that he had bigger problems than that. Being namely, he was an ungodly, evil man. And sometimes we as godly, God-fearing people want to just think the best out of everybody. He was not a good person. He was greedy. He was not a God-fearing man. He wasn't going to be generous at all. And God was going to judge him for it. And I think he might have even judged him through David, but there's another step involved.
Yeah, for sure. I think nothing shows any sense of desires for repentance or any sort of attitude that shows that he's not totally set in his ways and fully willing to indulge the lifestyle that he wants and has attained somehow, whether through family or through his own possession in his own lifetime. But yeah, he has no positive qualities that were given in any situation. Not only that is directly said about him, but also how everyone else around him acts with him kind of as the centerpiece of this whole story, but yet he is totally isolated and separated out for the sake of reconciliation. Gary.
Yeah, so first thing, I thought you made a really good comment about David's representation of who he was and representing God, the way they treated his servants and the pride that David took in the way he led, right? So that should have been a great influence on those folks. One thing that I also thought about too was just when we talk about the harsh judgment, the immediate snap judgment, and not being discerning, right? In all honesty, I think we look in the mirror sometimes, we got to be careful because, I don't know, I think it's a good example of, maybe we need to slow our judgments down about people, situations, other things, and have more of a loving and discerning attitude, before we make a rash judgment and not be godly.
Yeah, and I think I agree totally with that. And I think kind of tying that with Dad's comment, I think you could be someone who easily is, maybe you have good intentions initially but you get down this wayward path of I've got to discern the innermost hearts of every person. And I think you see someone like Nabal who all the other interactions of him show that he was using that as a as an excuse to disregard a responsibility he should have fulfilled, and had every right to, right? There's some of us, who, we think like, I can't help so-and-so because I just don't know if their intentions are good, right? And then that hinders us so often versus, people who it's just like, I never really wanted to help, but I'll go ahead and say I didn't help because I didn't know if they were genuine, Like, so I think David's interaction here, kind of reveals all doubt of that, of his heart. And like, there's evidence, and obviously we see that, he has witnesses that worked for Nabal that could have, supported his point. But Nabal was just going to use whatever situation he had to disregard responsibilities he could have fulfilled. So Nabal showed his wickedness. David, once again, has shown his quality. But now we're going to be in this situation, which I think is unique, right? Because this quick idea to break everything down into like wicked, good, wicked, good, all the time. Here we have David in this situation where I think we've seen how he's acted, and he seemed to act in such a good manner throughout extremely difficult circumstances, right? And now he comes to this situation with Nabal, who's insulted him. And I don't even think it's just necessarily even just to David, but you got to remember this entire group is a group of outcasts, right? So when you talk about leaving their masters, leaving their responsibilities and all, you've got a whole group of people like this. Now, David obviously is the one who really takes this insult the most personally. But what's his immediate response once he hears back from his servants? Yeah. Strapping on our swords, we're going to go take care of business. And what's David do after that? He makes a promise. What does he say is going to happen? Yeah, Jordan. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is meant to be a look at this story and see how David acts in a very different manner in this situation, which I think, if you remember reading through this, sorry, I had it written down in my notes, but now it's disappeared. But verse 21. Surely in vain have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. Where have we heard that phrase very recently? Who said that? Turn back one page to chapter 24. You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good where I have repaid you evil. That is what Saul said to David after they had that interaction in the cave and David cut off his cloak. And Saul has this, moment of realization, and he bears out his heart about, hey, I recognize God's going to make you king and all this stuff is going to happen. And, everything is going to be as God wills it. But he makes that phrase, I've repaid you, evil for all the good that you've paid me. And now, it's the same thing happening to David. What's the difference, though, between Saul and Nabal? Just before we get into anything else. What's the difference? Who is Saul? The king, the Lord's anointed. What is Nabal not? Is he the Lord's anointed? Does he have any sort of, established position that David is like, well, that's not for me to do. And we'll get into, whether it's right or wrong for him to do this, but he's not the Lord's anointed, right? But we've seen David, and it's not even just chapter 24, but, Saul's referencing for day after day, I've been pursuing you to kill you. We talked about that, how God's been delivering him day after day while they've been, running from Saul. He's constantly been at the mercy of people repaying his good with evil, day after day, right? Very much, and I know I've brought up Joseph's comparisons a lot, but Joseph, for so much of his life, was getting repaid evil for all the good that he was doing. Even the simple interaction with the why can't I think of the I want to say winemaker, but cupbearer, yeah. Even that guy, he says, hey, just remember me. That guy literally immediately forgets. I don't want to say that, is at the point of evil, but even that, can't get a full repayment of good for that service until 2 years down the line, I believe. Or years down the line. But David has been suffering at the hands of, repaying evil for good. And I think at this point we see, like most of us would do, and I'm quite confident I would have done it way earlier than David. Done. No more good, judgment's coming. Go ahead, John. Yeah, absolutely. And so let's get to that. I feel bad we haven't even brought up Abigail enough already. So David's on the way there. Abigail hears about this from one of the servants. What does she do? How does she act? Well, we know it's a wealthy household, right? There's a lot there, and it's a time of feast. Right? It's a time of feasting during the time when they're shearing the sheep. So this would have been a time of great feasting, and we're even going to see Nabal at the end of the chapter is feasting, having a great feast when Abigail, comes back to the house. So what does she decide to do? Go ahead, Jordan.
Basically takes matters into her own hands. She knows that Nabal has set them on this course where something bad's going to happen. So she talks to she gathers the supplies, and she personally takes them to David to appease his wrath.
Yes. All right, very good. So she, first off, acts very quickly, right? She decides, hey, we're going to take these supplies, a lot of food, a lot of supplies. We're going to send them to David. You go on ahead of me, and then I will come as well. Don't talk to Nabal at all. No one goes to Nabal for any information, none for any authority. I'm deciding this, let's go. Let's take care of the situation. So the supplies go out ahead of her. She goes and meets David, gets down off the donkey, falls on her face, and petitions to David. So we have 3 petitions, right, in this chapter. The first 2 did not go very well. David's was responded with disrespect. Obviously, Nabal's interaction is responded with, vengeance is about to come. And now we have Abigail show up here. And I just want to focus on a couple of things that I think are very significant of how she talks here. Okay? So she comes, and first thing, she falls down on her face to David and, says, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. So she, first off, on me alone be the guilt. What is she doing? What is she becoming here? Yeah, she is becoming a sacrifice on behalf of the rest of the people that she, is responsible over. Now, Nabal is technically supposed to be responsible, but I think we see from this chapter and how intelligent she is actually the true authority over this household and the one that, notice the servants came to her after Nabal's response, right? There's nothing that we've seen from anywhere in history that they would normally just go do that and be like, hey, now let's go talk to the master's wife. But you see how the servants hold her in such high regard, as well as I think holding Nabal in such low regard. But Abigail goes, and first off, she says, if this is going to happen, put it on me, right? Which she had no guilt whatsoever. She didn't even know about the situation. So she first is willing to sacrifice herself on behalf of the rest of the estate. After that, I love what she says, and I know, man, I really hate that I wasted so much time not even getting to Abigail, but let me get through some of this, so I'm sorry if I kind of steal the rest of class. But notice how she talks to David, and tell me if you notice anything familiar here. But she says, she talks about the worthless fellow that Nabal is. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. So first off, we've already seen how David's gone and tried to relay who he is to Nabal. Abigail comes to David and explains who David is to David. So this is kind of where I think, they must have known something about David to a certain extent, or at least Abigail did, right? I think it's reasonable to understand maybe why Nabal had no idea what was going on or who David was possibly. But she tells all this stuff to David. And let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. She's telling all these things about David, that the type of man he's been, the type of servant he's been. All of these things are not in line with what David's about to do, right? All these things that she is talking about with David are different from what David is about to act on. She's trying to remind David of who he is and talks about fighting the Lord's battles, not being guilty of bloodshed, not saving with your own hand, right? All these things that the Lord has done for you, right? The Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good he has spoken concerning you, as has appointed you prince over Israel. My Lord shall have no cause of griefs or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. She's saying all these things you haven't done will all be things I can no longer say about you if you follow through on this. Because David is responding as his own executioner. Executioner. He is going to be the executioner for his own vengeance. Whereas every other time, even chapter 24, David has already said to Saul, part of the reason I also don't act in vengeance against you is because I am so confident the Lord will avenge me against you at some point. David is confident of that fact. Here he is not responding in that same type of way. And he's about to go wipe out an entire estate, right? Not just Nabal, but the entire estate. And has already made this rash vow, which we know from Leviticus is already something you shouldn't do. And I don't want to spend a lot of time in the last few seconds I have, but it's also not evil that David breaks this vow. Like, we don't need to get into that, right? Obviously, it was good that he broke the vow and didn't kill every single person on this estate. But she says all this stuff to him. David responds very similar to a way I think he's going to respond in 2 Samuel when he's also confronted with what he's about to do. Well, Nathan gives more of a story, but essentially Abigail says, this is what you've done, this is what you've been, by kind of relaying this is what you're all about to be guilty of. Same thing with what Nathan did. Hey, this is what you did, this is what you're guilty of. And both times, David responds very similarly, where he recognizes, first off, God, is kind of sent this person to him, has revealed this to him. God has sent you to me this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. So we're going to talk more about this on Sunday. I'm sorry that we didn't get through the whole chapter. There's a lot in here that I still want to talk about with Abigail, but this is another great reason of the difference between Saul and David, right? We talked about how David's rash actions and his vow are very Saul-like, but his response to Abigail's revealing to him, kind of showing him the mirror of what he's becoming in this situation, this is another reason of what makes David a man after God's own heart, how he continually, when he goes off course, when he changes to being about his own will, he realigns his will to God's will. He goes back to trusting in God. And those are things that when Saul was confronted, when Saul's placed the mirror in front of him, he doesn't do that. He continues on that same path. So Abigail becomes this great mirror to David to see how he should respond versus how he is responding. And so she spares not only her own life, but all of the people in her household, which is pretty special. So we'll finish up chapter 25 on Sunday before we get into chapter 26 and 27. So 3:10 on Sunday. Sorry, everybody, for taking 2 minutes from you. Thanks for your comments.